We're continuing in a series, this summer series, going through the life of our founder, Rev Sun Myung Moon. The anniversary of his passing to the spirit world was just last Tuesday. Hopefully a lot of you were able to watch that, participate online. It was broadcast all around the world through the internet. Amazing technology that we have today. But what we've been doing is, through this month, we've been going through and looking at different aspects of Father Moon's life and how it applies to us and lessons that we can learn. We start out talking about his mission as Messiah and how actually each one of us is called to be a Messiah, a tribal Messiah. Also, we're called to be champions for marriage and heavenly business people, right? Conscientious, good business people. Last week we talked about being interfaith champions and working with people from all different religions and all different faiths working together. Today we're going to talk about Father Moon's life in prison. So as you know, Father Moon spent a fair amount of time, 6 times he was in prison. Now, in our lives we may not face that kind of serious adversity, but I think there's some lessons that we can learn in terms of dealing with adversity in our own lives. So, the 6 times, the first time was as he was a student in Japan and in Tokyo. This is during World War II. Japan had control over Korea. In 1944, it was in Korea, but it was by the Japanese police, Japanese forces. And then 1946 was in North Korea, in Pyongyang. And then 1946 to 48 was when he spent that time in that labor camp. Then back down in South Korea, the South Korean government spent 3 months in prison. And then in America, he was sentenced to 18 months in prison. So, a lot of time in prison. Let's quickly go through these. In Tokyo, Japan, Father Moon after he finished high school, he went to Japan to study at the university there. And while he was there, he got involved in the student underground movement that was focused on liberating Korea from Japanese control. So he was part of this movement, and the police took him in for questioning and were trying to find out the names of the other conspirators, the other people who were in part of this underground movement. So he was tortured significantly trying to get names, which he never gave up, so he got more torture. And there's some interesting stories around that. But that was his first time in imprisonment, was in Japan. Well, then after that, he went back to Korea, and still Korea is controlled by Japan. So he went through and was also arrested there by the Japanese authorities, imprisoned in October, and tortured continuously trying to find out who else is involved in this liberation movement to liberate Korea from Japanese control. He refused to confess and was eventually released in February. But that's like October, November, December, January, February. 5 months where they're questioning him and torturing him, trying to get him to reveal these other names. Well, after that, World War II ends and Korea is liberated, only Korea is divided into half. We have the North, which is communist controlled, and the South, which is a republic. Well, God calls Father Moon to North Korea under communist control to preach. Well, so he goes to Pyongyang, which is the capital of communist North Korea. And in 1946, the police arrest him for disturbing the social order. Because basically he was preaching. You know, if you're familiar with communism, communism and religion don't mix. The communist government hates religious people. And also there's a little bit of jealousy on the part of the other Christians because his church grew really fast. A newcomer pops up there, starts preaching, and all of a sudden people are coming all over to hear that. Well, the police actually tortured him until they thought he was dead. Basically, they figured, they killed him. They threw him out into the prison yard and just left him for someone to come up and take the body. Well, some of his followers came and found him, and actually he wasn't yet dead, almost dead, and then nursed him back to health. He didn't go back down to the South, which you'd think might have been the smart thing to do. He went back out on the street and was preaching again and witnessing and working. The police again arrested him, but this time there was 82 anonymous letters Probably they came from other churches because so many people were coming to him instead of going to their churches. To the authorities, complain about him. So he was imprisoned and tortured again in Pyongyang, and then eventually sent to this Hyungnam labor camp for disturbing society. He was causing a disturbance in society. And that prison camp you saw in the video, it was basically they made fertilizer, ammonium sulfate, and they used different sulfuric acid and different kinds of things that really, it burns your skin. They're in a very cold environment, and they're fed minimally. It was quite a suffering situation. But he persevered and was there for almost 3 years. Typically, this was a death camp. Typically, people lived only 6 months. Basically, the job of the guards was work people to death so we don't have to worry about them anymore. And we'll send you some more bad guys. Some more people who are disturbing society. This is the nature of a communist government in the communist world. Well, during that time, North Korea invaded the South. And fortunately, America and the United Nations came to response and defended South Korea from the invasion. There's a story, but in October of 1950, MacArthur made this Incheon invasion. He kind of did a flank around the forces and cut right in the middle of Korea to invade. And during that, they bombed the prison, the Hungnam prison facility where they were doing all this work. That was, at that point, Father Moon was able to escape. So eventually, he goes back to Pyongyang, and then eventually he goes down to South Korea, begins working in South Korea, and in 1954 actually establishes the Unification Church. Actually, he didn't establish the church. It was the Holy Spirit Association for the Unification of World Christianity, because Father Moon's mission is to bring together Christians in different Christian churches. Amazingly, one of the Christian universities, women's universities, so many seminary students came and joined the church. So many that the president of the university got really upset and began complaining, had some power, and so got the police to arrest Father Moon and take him in. The first time they just took him in, and they couldn't charge him with anything. So he was there for like a couple of days, and they had to let him go. A couple of weeks later, they brought him in and accused him of evading the military draft. And he spent 3 months in prison while they debated that case. That time that he was supposedly evaded the draft, that was the time that he was in prison in North Korea. So it was not possible for him to participate in the draft at that time. Anyway, after that, he was released and all the charges were dropped. It basically said, there's no case here at all. But unfortunately, at the very beginning, the newspapers were filled with the headlines. You know, Moon cult, evil, destroying families, is arrested, going to be sent to prison. Big headlines. When he's actually released and acquitted, saying none of that was true, there was like 3 lines on the back page, in the middle of the newspaper, that said, oh, Reverend Moon was acquitted, that's all. So what people remember is all the negative stuff. And that's been a challenge that's the impression people have of the Unification Church and Father Moon and his mission. Well, coming to America, it came in the early 70s, and the movement really began growing. It was a phenomenal time of growth. And one of the challenges that occurred was this is the time in the mid-70s of Watergate. Remember President Nixon? You've probably heard about him. Well, Father Moon prayed about it, and he felt God told him that he had to support President Nixon. Not because Nixon did something good or he wasn't a bad guy, but for the sake of America and for the sake of the world. So Father Moon actually had the chance to meet with President Nixon one-on-one. And he told President Nixon, you need to go in front of the American people and you need to confess. You need to confess what you did was wrong. You need to repent. You need to apologize to America for what you did, and you need to ask them to forgive you. And if you do that, God will protect you and America will forgive you, because America is a Christian nation. You know, they always say that the big thing that people get caught of is not the problem itself, it's the cover-up. It's the fact that they're hiding the secret. If he had come out and confessed and admitted, I made a mistake, I did something wrong, please forgive me, then he could have solved the problem. This was important because at this time we're in a serious time of the Cold War. The Cold War is on the verge of becoming hot, and President Nixon actually was doing some good things in terms of political side. Anyway, because we took that stand, we got a bullseye on our back from the leftist community. They saw, okay, and also Rev Moon in our church has been very strongly anti-communist, critiquing Marxist theory and like that. So the people in the government that tended to be more pro-Marxist saw this guy is a problem. So just a couple years later, actually after the Washington Monument, which is a huge rally that Father held in 1976, it was a God Bless America campaign, remembering that it was a 200-year bicentennial of America's founding. And he had this huge rally that God has a great vision and hope for America. And he preached that. And the rally was just huge. Well, some people in the government figured this guy is getting too big, too strong. And so Congressman Donald Frazier, he's actually from Minnesota, he is in charge of the House Subcommittee on Internal Organizations. And what he did was he investigated different international organizations, And he looked at all this, and he had this very left kind of look. He would look at all kinds of governments that he thought were abusing civil rights and human rights. But he looked at like maybe about 80, but he only looked at 3 or 4 communist countries. Kind of ignored the communist countries where there was lots of people being killed and like that, and focused on the other countries and really had an agenda. Well, he called in the Rev Moon's assistant, Bohi Pak, and Bohi Pak went and had to testify a number of times. And usually, a powerful government official comes in, gonna knock you down. The people come and they just go, yes, whatever you want. Bohi Pak, basically, he went up there and he says, why are you saying this to me? I'm a proud Korean. I'm proud to be in America. I love this country. This country saved my country. Why would I ever want to do anything against this country? I am so grateful. As a Korean, I'm so grateful. He really rah. And actually, there's even a movie that he put out, The Truth is My Sword, where you see the video of him standing and saying, you, Donald Frazier, you're a tool of Satan, in Congress. He's saying that kind of stuff. It's very interesting to see. If you look at the book and read his testimony, it's phenomenal. But this basically it came to be called Koreagate, because what Frazier was saying is that the Unification Church is an arm of the Korean CIA, and they're trying to do something devious in America. They're in here and they're doing bad things, and so we need to get rid of them. Well, all of that investigation came to nothing. They spent lots of money, and there was no result, especially because Bohi Pak didn't just say, oh, I'm so sorry, and run and hide. And he stood up, he could have gotten in big trouble, contempt of court, thrown into prison himself. Well, it didn't stop there, though. Donald Frazier disappeared. He didn't get reelected after this. But the trend for the American government being concerned in attacking Father Moon and the Unification movement, because they were seeing it was becoming a very significant force in America. A significant force because we stood for family values, for God-centered society, for justice, and we're strongly anti-communist. And America at that time was kind of like, being more comfortable and cozy with some of the more leftist nations. So in America, if you want to get someone and you can't find any law to get them on, where do you go? You go for the taxes, right? You get them on tax charges. So what they did is they indicted Father Moon on tax charges. Now, what they did was, when Father Moon was out of the country, was when the indictment went down. Because Father Moon didn't have to come back to America. There's no, to come back to America, there's no extradition treaty with Korea. Since he's a Korean citizen, he didn't have to come to America. If he didn't come back, they could never try him. They couldn't force the Korean government to send it to him or anything. But Father Moon, and that was their plan. They figured, look, we give him this thing, he'll know, and actually the lawyers advised, don't go back. You go back, they're going to get you for something. You know, if they're out to get you, they're going to get you. So don't go back. You know, just stay in Korea, you'll be fine. And Father Moon says, no. God called me to America for a mission. How can I not go there when God wants me to be there? So he flew right back, went before the judge, and said, I'm innocent. I'm not guilty. And so went through the whole process. Actually, the trial itself started in April 1st, 1982. Went for 48 days. It was really a travesty. I was in New York at that time. It went one day. Father Moon had asked that a judge try this, because the newspapers are making all kinds of slanders. If a judge, they'll do it by the law, and I'll get a fair trial. But the prosecution decided, oh no, I'm going to do a jury by trial, by people that are influenced by the media. And when I went, the testimonies that I heard was not people saying, yes, Rev Moon cheated on his taxes. All the testimonies were, Rev Moon is an evil man and he breaks up families and he's trying to destroy America. What? That had nothing to do. It was just every testimony was just saying bad things about Father Moon to influence the jury. Had nothing to do with taxes. In fact, this is what the case was. That for the first 3 years that the church was established in America, Father Moon had not paid all the taxes that were due. This is what the charge was. The total amount of taxes that were due were $7,300. So that's like maybe $2,000 or $3,000 a year for 3 years. Now, in America, no one ever goes to prison for something like that. There's people that have had $50,000, $100,000 taxes that they owed. And the government says, okay, pay your back taxes and here's a fine. Pay a fine. You just give them a fine. You never send someone to prison for that. This is just, even that threshold is not even high enough for the government to even consider it worthwhile, because the government spent millions of dollars prosecuting this case. Over 6 weeks to pay for a jury and all this kind of stuff. But the goal wasn't just to get him to pay back that $7,000. American government really needed that $7,000. They wanted to get rid of Father Moon. They wanted to tar his name and try to break the power and the growth of the movement in America. So Father Moon was sentenced to 18 months in prison, in federal prison, for not paying $7,000. It's like $2,000 or $3,000 a year he missed. There was a subcommittee. Here's a Senate Judiciary Committee. This was headed by Orrin Hatch from Utah. And they did an investigation because they said this is clearly religious persecution. This has nothing to do with taxes. And I'm going to read from the findings that this subcommittee, from their report. The title is Injustice Rather Than Justice Has Been Served. So the report goes, the government accused a newcomer to our shores of criminal and intentional wrongdoing for conduct commonly engaged in by a large percentage of our own religious leaders. Namely, the holding of church funds in bank accounts in their own names. Catholic priests do it, Baptist ministers do it, and so did Sun Myung Moon. What Father Moon was being accused of is that what happened when it first came, there wasn't a bank account for the church. So all the church money was put in a bank account under Father Moon's name. Father Moon then paid taxes on the money that he spent for his own stuff, for his own rent, for his own food, things like that. That was considered his money. All the rest of the money was considered the church's money. And this practice was common among, especially storefront churches, but Catholic priests. This is not an uncommon practice like it says right here. But Father Moon was being singled out. Actually, this was an interesting time in American history because religious persecution was also growing. There was more just general attack on religion. It was harder for churches to get permits. People didn't want the churches, and there was kind of like this attack broadly. The government saw an opportunity with Rev Moon, this very unpopular guy. If they can set a precedent that shows that the churches can't do this, they can attack the Catholic Church. Wow, a lot of money there. They can go after the Catholic Church. They can go after these small storefront, these Baptist churches. All these churches, they'd have a way to get in. So this was clearly, there's another strategy than just get Rev Moon. And part of this is why there were so many churches and religious organizations that sent in letters. It's called amicus briefs, I think is the legal term, that says, we support Rev Moon's innocence because he's doing what we're doing and it's not against the law to do what we're doing. And there was hundreds of that kind of support from all, actually even from churches that persecute us, that didn't like us. They said, look, we may not agree with what his theology, but what he's doing is not wrong. What he's doing is what we do. I'll read some more from this report. It says, we charged a non-English speaking alien with criminal tax evasion on the first tax returns he filed in this country. It appears that we didn't even give him a fair chance to understand our laws. We didn't seek a civil penalty as an initial means of redress. We didn't give him the benefit of the doubt. Rather, we took a novel theory of tax liability of less than $10,000 and turned it into a guilty verdict and 18 months in a federal prison. I do feel strongly, after my subcommittee has carefully and objectively reviewed this Rev Moon's tax case from both sides, that injustice rather than justice has been served. The Moon case sends a strong signal that if one's views are unpopular enough, this country will find a way not to tolerate it, but to convict. I don't believe that you or I or anyone else, no matter how innocent, could realistically prevail against the combined forces of our Justice Department and the judicial branch in such a case as Rev Moon's. So, Father Moon goes to Danbury, Connecticut, the prison in Danbury. And here's his expression. Here I am, I'm going. Yeah, it's amazing, because when he went, members really struggled. Thought, what are we going to do? The government is out to get us. Should I, is this an okay place to be here? Should I run? And Father Moon said, don't worry. While I'm in prison, work harder than ever for the sake of this nation. God needs America for the sake of the world. So please invest. Do your best for the benefit of this nation. Even while I'm in Danbury, he kept encouraging us and giving. It was amazing. Around this time, 1982, was when the big wedding was in Madison Square Garden. He'd already been convicted, and here he is conducting this incredible wedding. Father Moon's second son died in a car accident. So many serious things. He was still traveling to Korea, doing speaking tours, anti-communist rallies in Korea. Still very, very active. And then he goes to prison, to Danbury prison. So, what can we learn from this?